Welcome, 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 my lovely brothers and sisters. Welcome, and welcome to another live book reading. I am still reading from the Orion book, Volume 2, written by Wes Penry. And today I'm going to do two chapters, chapter 7 and chapter 8, which is all about the overlords. And the first chapter, number 7, is titled The Overlord's Exit Promises. And chapter 8 is titled The Overlord's Internal Affairs. Because they have internal affairs, and let us see how we can see these affairs reflected back in society. All right, I start with chapter 7, The Overlord's Exit Promises. Contract between Orion and the Overlords, and the official name of Orion is Arian. And if you say that quite fast, then you can almost hear the word Orion. No one knows what went on in Enki's mind before and during the Titan War and the second construct. Was he treacherous already from the beginning? Did he so-called secretly work together with the Khan kings, which are the Syrian overlords, from the get-go orchestrating the entire destruction of Tiamat, our former home planet? Or did his rebellious thoughts not come to mind until the end of the Atlantis era? Although some things are unclear, there are hints we can follow up. After researching and connecting dots, some of it based on conversations with an Orion source, the Orion source from now on, it seems unlikely that Enki planned the invasion of the solar system. It was a Syrian inside job. As already discussed, a potential confusion regarding the contract between the Syrian Empire and the Orion Empire. Therefore, it is reasonable to expect that Enki did not fight on the Syrian side in the war. Whatever the case, he took advantage of the situation later, because in actuality, the entire plan to undo Tiamat from the experiment and to blow up the entire Tiamat was something that didn't bother Enki at all. To recap a little, after the destruction of Tiamat and after an Orion court ruling that it must be further established who owns what, Enki had three hands to continue the experiment in the solar system, which he did in the physical realm, where he was a genetic expert and could use technology. He knew the technology very well regarding how to create species among the developing worlds. After discussions back and forth with the Orion Council, Enki, got the green light to set up the experiment on the new planet Earth, which is a, a piece left over of Tiamat. The question is, was he still loyal to Orion? No, because Enki is a trickster. Or had his rebellion already formed inside his head? We know he got a narcissistic injury when he was demoted to being second in rank under his younger brother during the Tiamat experiment. Therefore, we can safely presume he at least held grudges. I could not find trustworthy information on how long the second construct lasted, but it appears that Enki mostly behaved, although I am sure he didn't like that Orion took control over his experiment. He was the so-called creator of the physical Homo sapiens bodies after much hard work figuring out how to animate these species. Therefore, Tiamat was the queen of the stars experiment, but Earth was Enki's. That is how he reasoned. He did apparently disregard that Orion never gave him permission to create a new experiment on Earth that could be called Enki's experiment. He was merely allowed to be the builder of the new world where the Queen of the Stars offspring could continue the failed Tiamat project. It becomes shady when he and Isis gave birth to Horus, which was the first incarnation of Marduk's avatar on Earth. Was that planned, or did Marduk hijack the body without Enki's and Isis' consent? We do not know, but I find it unlikely that Enki and Isis would give birth to Horus without knowing Marduk would take the body. If my suspicion is correct, it means that we now have a point in time when we can highly suspect Enki had planned his revenge and possible takeover of Earth, if not even Orion at that point. We know he wanted humankind for himself, and it had little to do with his so-called love for us because he doesn't give a darn about us. He doesn't even love us at all. Unless Marduk forced himself into that body, why would Enki/Osiris agree to letting Isis give birth to Horus if he despised him for having destroyed his mother's experiment on Tiamat? There is little doubt at the end of Atlantis when Enki soul group yeah when Enki experimented with genetics left and right, he was planning on creating new and better bodies for us that would suit his first attempt to create a singularity in which we are now all trapped into. So that you know, bodies that suited his, Enki's, agenda better in what he considered his experiment. It is all well known among alternative historians that the end of Atlantis was a highly technological era. So this means that we are reliving this Atlantis era, and from what I came to understand is that the new creation of Atlantis, the place on earth that has been chosen for that is America. I also have grounds for my suspicion when I review the wealth of communication I have archived between me and the Orion source. There I found a reference where it states that the main reason for Orion to instigate the flood was Enki mixing human DNA with his and others' extraterrestrial DNA. That is precisely what he also has done in this construct. This construct that we are now living in, already in the beginning of the Matrix. Enki and Isis, and later Marduk and Ereshkigal, mixed their genes with that of humans. So we can say that we as human beings do not carry only human genetics in us, but also genetics from Enki, Marduk, Isis, Ereshkigal, and other off-planet species. It is the same pattern. Then they could insert parts of themselves into our bodies through our ancestry DNA, so they can easier manipulate and control us. That's interesting. This is the same principle as when we say we are affected in present time by our own ancestral line. When Enki and Isis created the first mixed bloodline in this construct, it was the first major step toward a singularity, which we have been sucked into as human beings. This happened thousands of years ago. Now they only needed to take over our minds enough to have faith to manage putting us into a singularity and get away with it. When Prince Ninurta and Orion saw what Enki had done at the end of the Atlantis period, they knew the Queen's experiment was void. It was destroyed and could not be preserved. So, as a better alternative, it was decided to wipe out life on Earth and let the three unit composites return to Orion, which are us. They wanted to have all human souls back into Orion. Unfortunately, this did not happen for all human souls, just for a small percentage. When it dawned to Enki he would never be in control of humankind so long as Orion was breathing in his neck, he lied to Orion and set up a new private experiment free from Orion's snooping and without asking Orion for permission. The new experiment should be entirely his. However, he seemed to so-called forget that the beings he was going to populate his experiment with were in actuality uh, us and thus human beings created by the Queen of the Stars herself, the divine feminine. He created the matrix with a dome and a grid to keep Orion out and humankind for permanently in. Whereafter we have had a very hard time reconnecting with Orion and the Queen of the Stars. At this time, I think Enki's mind was fully occupied with creating a full-fledged singularity with his human children as cannon fodder and avatars to ride into Orion and take it over. Because that is Enki's main plan, to take over the entire Orion. But it is also Marduk's plan. Um, so in his introject, he did nothing wrong. Others did the wrongdoing. This is the deeply rooted narcissistic trait in Enki. No one, Enki is like, it is not my fault, it is always someone else's fault. This is exactly how a narcissist is doing. It's always the other person's wrongdoing. This was his experiment, and the three unit composites were his property because he provided us, human beings, with physical bodies and had created a new experiment as far as we humans were concerned in his mind. We had become his so-called babies, and Orion was treating him badly and unjustly. In his thoughts, if we follow common narcissistic thought patterns, he, Enki, considered himself grossly undervalued, and he was going to show his mother, Kam Enlil, and his annoying brother, who is the smartest and who is best fit to run Orion. And just look at your children, mother. Your human soul group is weak, and I can't even defend themselves against me and my people, although they are many times greater in number. You want them to run the universe as creators? Creators? Look how easy it is to manipulate them. He thought, and the Syrians, of course, agree to such a mindset because in their reality, the cruelest and the strongest deserves to rule. So there we have the root of the strongest shall survive. But none of them understands the first thing about spirit because they never possessed it. They think the most ferocious and forceful beings should be in control of the rest. It is not so at all. The universe needs compassionate and empathetic beings as creators. But the overlords do not understand what compassion is, let alone empathy. And they do not even have compassion for themselves. When Enki had established himself in the matrix and we humans were procreating again, Orion found this new, hidden construct and reached out to Enki. After arguing back and forth, an agreement, a contract was created. Enki had locked himself and the human soul group inside the grid, so Orion could not get in without destroying the grid. This is an utterly low frequency band that we have been imprisoned into. This they didn't want to do because the grid comprises the mass consciousness of the human soul group, and to demolish it would be counterproductive, particularly at that stage. Enki has given us deliberately amnesia and the between lives area where the human souls eventually are being recycled when they die, which is in the astral realm, by the way, was now set up. So our bodies were much denser than the Atlantis bodies. So we could no longer remember who we are. And this is the whole crux in our life because we start to remember something vaguely of ourselves round about the time that we start to become 50. Yeah? So all the time we are still struggling, living in a rat race, surviving, and so on, and do the bidding of the overlords because that is what the human soul group is doing. Lovely brothers and sisters, each one of us humans is doing the bidding of the overlords 24/7 a day. So thus, Orion could not get our consent, and the consequences of destroying the grid were not pretty. The following was included in the agreement between Enki and Orion. Enki could continue the matrix experiment without Orion's oversight if he promised to let us evolve and then set us free. Well, this promise, of course, Enki is a trickster, so he tricked Orion Council again for the manyth time and broke a promise. He, Enki, promised to do so, but of course, Enki, being a trickster and a master manipulator and persuader, he, Enki, broke the agreement without technically breaking it. He created his own so-called ascension program within the matrix system, which at least appeared to lead out of the matrix system long term dash very long term. So let us see in the last piece of this chapter more on Enki's false ascension program, because it's a false program. And this whole New Age movement is indeed Enki's platform to lure as much as possible human beings into his so-called ascension program, which is not ascension at all. It is highly unlikely that Enki's ascension program leads out of the matrix even long term. What we learn about his program is that each so-called dimension can take 1,000,000 years to complete. According to the raw material, the fourth dimension, or the fourth density as they call it, takes about 1,000,000 years to complete. So what is it supposed to achieve for us? What can we learn there that takes so long? Apparently, we will learn and practice compassion for 1,000,000 years. So, what can we learn there that takes so long? Apparently, we will learn and practice compassion for 1,000,000 years. And that comes from the overlords who do not understand compassion themselves because they lack spirit. So how can they understand compassion? They cannot understand compassion. They do not understand empathy. They do for certain not understand what love is. And these overlords are then teaching, passing over humans in and through a so-called ascension program what compassion is and what empathy is and what true love is. I think that they in actuality are more learning how to become more narcissistic, sociopathic, and psychopathic, because that is what the overlords themselves are. So look who is talking. Aside from that, far from all humans will, so-called, climb up the ascension rungs. Many are manipulated into taking another route, becoming so-called spirit guides. After holding this position for a long time, they may get so-called promoted to become teachers, meaning they will be channels slash mediums for humans here on Earth. Since having followed a variety of channeled material over the years, I find it unlikely that anyone ascends at all within this closed system. Just like the money system is a closed system, all world society is a closed system and shall stay a closed system. This whole lie of decentralizing the money system is a lie, people. Shall never happen because the overlords do not want to have this. They want to keep everything locked and closed. So, since having followed a variety of channeled material over the years, I find it unlikely that anyone ascends at all within this closed system. Still, that is justified by the overlords by taking some of us out of the reincarnation cycle and putting us on so-called loftier tasks. Thus, they let us so-called evolve. I would argue that the humans who become spirit guides and later teachers will not ascend at all. Instead, they descend, in the sense they get even more indoctrinated by the matrix system, becoming even more loyal to Enki. So far, from what I have heard, no one has graduated from the matrix. Since a few people who have followed my revelations about the grid have died within the last few years and have hopefully left the matrix through a hole in the grid, the overlords most likely justify our lack of graduation by convincing themselves they gave us all the chances to exit. Did they? But we screwed up. Instead of following the narrow path to freedom, we continue following others and thus the overlords, rather than thinking for ourselves and doing inner work, which would give us insights on how to best exit. Having these kinds of justifications handy, the overlords think they can get away with it in a hypothetical future cosmic court, but they shall never get away with anything that they have done against the human soul group. They will get their justice. Another justification is even more entitled and delusional. They think they can justify the lack of graduation so far with the fact that they will create the singularity, the metaverse. When that is in place, which is already in place, and in actuality we are in the last stages of it, the overlords can let us all so-called free to exit the matrix. Thus, Enki and the Khan kings have kept their end of the bargain. That is how they think. Yeah, that's how a narcissistic mind thinks. Oh, there is a uh, caveat. Of course, the overlords will come with us and they will be so eager to keep the bargain that they will ride our avatar all the way to the Queen's court. So it is good that I am presenting to you all this information, because we need to wake up what is truly going on and see the things that are happening around us for what they truly are. All right, I go now to chapter 8 of the Orion book, volume 2, written by Wes Penry. And it's titled The Overlord's Internal Affairs, because they have internal affairs. Of course they have. The abyss, comma, better termed as the Abzu. I asked the Orion source during my West Penry years where Enki currently dwells, and the answer was he is still in the Abzu or Apsu. Earlier on, I said Enki dwells in the abyss, thinking it was the same thing as the Abzu. But reviewing my files, I found out it is not. The abyss is usually another term for the void, as I now understand it. The Apsu is what the old Sumerian mythology calls the carcass. It is a term for the bottom of the deepest chasm of the matrix, the lowest of the lowest section of the astral, sometimes called the hell dimension. This is discussed in the Vedas, in Egyptian mythology, in Nordic mythology, in the Eddas, the Babylonian texts, and also in the Nag Hammadi and elsewhere. When his brother, Enki's brother Ninurta, castrated him, making him impotent, Enki was cast out of Orion, the so-called heaven described in the Bible, and chained in the Abzu. Figuratively speaking, he, Enki, is since then trapped there, stripped of all his creative abilities. Of course, this is what the Bible calls the fall of Satan and the angels of heaven. Archangel Michael cast them all out, and they fell to the earth. And as the legend tells us, Satan lives in hell, which is in the underworld. What does it mean to be stripped of one's creative abilities? We do not know for sure, but taking that term into context, Enki was thrown down into the pit, where the density is extremely low. Metaphysically speaking, this denotes he cannot move around freely. It is too dense, and he cannot move up to the levels of the Ka, the spiritual universe, where he can use the energies in the Ka slash spiritual universe or take a body. So this means Enki himself is a cyborg. Yeah, and this cyborg also is stated as the godfather of the Matrix, this world. And this is the one that unfortunately many people are worshipping as so-called God. Um, I would suggest he is in a type of electric prison, and that he is trapped inside a specially designed grid created for him by Ninurta as a punishment for what he had done. What has Enki done? Enki has raped the daughter of Ninurta. This doesn't mean he is completely impotent. However, although his soul-mind is trapped in the Apsu, he can still shoot off fires into the upper realms, but he cannot do anything else with them than to shapeshift and observe. And when he, Enki, shapeshifts, he can only stay in that form for a short period while the energy lasts. I would argue he rarely does this because it is too draining for Enki. And so his energy is and has become very sparse. All right. The Greys and the Dracos. The Khan kings, or at least most of them, were also stripped of their creative abilities, but they were not chained in the Apsu like Enki. The Apsu imprisonment was Ninurta's retaliation, a punishment for having raped Isis, Ninurta's daughter. Marduk would probably have gotten the same treatment if he wasn't lucky enough to be earthbound in a human body, where it was and is hiding from Orion. It is harder to get to him from outside the matrix. After all, Enki was in Rigel when he was castrated and chained. Still, on a soul-mind level, they are apparently all stuck in the lower dimensions, which the Pleiadians call the Machine Kingdom. And the Pleiadians that are referring to this Machine Kingdom are the ones who are communicating with Barbara Marciniak. We humans are now about to join them there in the singularity. So, lovely brothers and sisters, this metaverse, this singularity is bringing us in the lowest of the lowest of the lowest frequency band existing, and keeps us even more trapped. And this is why we see a decreasing of energies here on Earth. This is also one of the reasons why we see a rise of narcissism and sociopathy and psychopathy, because unfortunately many of lovely, beautiful human souls were lured into the mindset of these cosmic narcissists, whom are dwelling in this what is called machine kingdom, thus called the lowest of the lowest astral um, level. Yeah, the lowest level in the astral realm. They are in the lowest of the lowest of the lowest um, part of the astral realm. And that is where they are luring us into. So we truly, lovely, beautiful human souls, we as human soul group, we really need to wake up. And this is the main reason why I am presenting you this information, to help you to see through what is in actuality happening to us and with us, and what the actual agendas are behind artificial intelligence, because this artificial intelligence, this AI, is part of this plan to entrap us in the lowest of the lowest levels of the astral realm. Do you want to be there? I don't. So we need to educate ourselves, and we need to inform ourselves. And that is why what I'm doing, that I'm doing. So we humans are now about to join them there in the singularity dash metaverse. The cons have an advantage before Enki. However, they can take bodies in the lower sections of the astral, which is below us in frequency. But these are cyborgs, and most of them are what we call the grays dash bodies, that are resilient to the harsh conditions in the physical realms and in the cosmic water. So they need to use these gray body types to enter our Earth frequency, radiated from Saturn. We have all heard about the Roswell incident in 1947 and the cover up that followed. Still, much information has leaked since then about how they found dead bodies of typical Greys, and they dissected them, finding they were half biological and half machine. They were cyborgs. This is why that they are spraying the air. People think that they can still call it chemtrailing, but as a matter of fact, um, we should really start questioning if this is the case. I know, and many others are knowing this too, that they are spraying already nanobots in the sky, in the air. So we are breathing in nanobots. Your pets are breathing in nanobots. These nanobots fall on the ground during rain season, and so come in our crops. Yeah, so we eat nanobots also. We drink nanobots because it comes in the water, and so on, so on. Um, the clothing is also already loaded with nanobots. So the overlords, are creating from the inside out cyborg body construct in us humans. Yeah, this is what is truly going on. Two flying saucers the cons used to browse the solar system with, with entered which entered our atmosphere. But something went wrong, so they crashed. Or the military might simply have shot them down. We do not know. A third option is that these crafts might have manifested inside our atmosphere by mistake and they crashed. I have nothing to back up the following statement with, but it is quite logical in my opinion. The beings people say they have encountered in the secret space program, the so called Dracos, are, as a matter of fact, the calm kings in space suits, i.e., their resilient cyborg types of bodies. It was Corey Goody who said in an interview with David Wilcock that this huge space commander, the infamous White Draco, seemed to be artificial intelligence. If it is true, Corey encountered this tall, intimidating being. It confirms my theory to some extent, but there is more. Why do we call them Dracos? Well, it is because people say they come from Alpha Draconis. Are they really? Are those inside the Draco spacesuit from Alpha Draconis, i.e., Tuban? Yes, many of them probably are. In the West Penry papers, I discussed it briefly. Alpha Draconis is not inhabited by reptilians, but the star system was once invaded by Marduk's forces. Probably before the War of the Titans, the inhabitants who survived became prisoners of war and slaves to Marduk and the Khan kings, the Sirius kings. Does it make sense that the so-called Dracos come from Alpha Draconis in a manner of speaking? However, they are still Syrian Khan kings coming from Sirius B. Maybe this tall commander in a Draco reptilian suit was Marduk, unless the entire Draco apparition is a cover-up memory because they can mess with our memory. They break in into our dream state and they mess with our dreams. So you even cannot rely on your dreams, so to say. The gray bodies, in conjunction with the reptilian bodies, probably work great as cyborg space suits. Inside those suits are the Khan Kings. If we think about it, we have reptiles on Earth in form of animals. Such beasts can be quite resilient. Their bodies are like armor, and it is difficult to fight them. Mind you, space is not a vacuum, as we have been told, with a temperature of 2.7 degrees Kelvin, comma, minus 455 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 270 degrees Celsius. Space is cosmic water, spirit, i.e., wave forms. So the overlords do not need these resilient bodies to fight low temperatures. They need them to function in the cosmic water and in battle. So let us see. Next subchapter. Ayahuasca experiences in the machine kingdom. I know of a few people who took ayahuasca and involuntarily visited the machine kingdom. Without having heard of it before, one such person is a female life coach who is not into conspiracies at all. She said on her YouTube channel it was a very, very, very artificial place where everything was machine, even the so-called living creatures were machines. It was an extremely dark place spiritually. Well, you can hardly call it spiritually. And it gave her panic attacks while visiting it. When she made the video, she still had panic attacks. So PTSD from the experience. She considered this to be hell and said she never wants to take ayahuasca again. This is the realm the overlords want us to descend to. And so far, we are rapidly on our way there as human soul group. So we need to wake the heck up. Is the earth descending or ascending? Well, look around us. We can say earth is in actuality descending. I think many of us who are on a self-exploring path are experiencing the same thing. This reality is decreasing in frequency, and it is because of the very intense manipulation right now on a worldly scale. In a former video, the last one that I created, was all about the global traumatization that we are in a daily basis. I would argue it is the fastest frequency drop we have experienced since the creation of the Matrix. Many people who are healing and connecting with their spirit body complain about fatigue, headaches, and even depression. I think that is because we feel the extreme depletion that is in a rapid pace going on. This depletion of energy in this matrix system. This matrix system is rapidly depleting in its energy, but also because of the density drop, because the lower we sink into the next frequency band, which is almost the lowest of the lowest frequency band we have sunk into, we become more and more dense. And this makes everything so extreme heavy. And this extreme heaviness has its toll on our mental and physical condition. The chasm between those who are increasing their awareness and those who are descending widens rapidly, and we feel it. There is a constant tiredness that does not go away with plenty of sleep. If NASA's uptake of the noise, i.e., the frequency emitted from Saturn, is accurate, it sounds extremely eerie and is very low in pitch. And there are already many people who are hearing very weird sounds, noises, who they are not able to explain. Well, what if these noises are in actuality the noises coming from this extreme low place in the astral realm that we are now hearing around us? This is the frequency that is transmitted to Earth. Some readers may now ask themselves the following: if the overlords want us to descend to their frequency band, why not just project the desired frequency from Saturn onto us right away? Problem solved. It is not that simple. My understanding, we have physical bodies that work within our unique frequency band. If they lower the frequency transmitted from Saturn too much and too fast, our bodies will probably self destruct. They must be careful, hence, they want us to become cyborgs. And now you get the understanding of the enforcement of using artificial intelligences, of using technology, and so on, so on, so on. Yeah, the whole medical scene that is already in a rapid pace being transformed in nanotechnology, so-called healthcare. Um, so they want us to become cyborgs, which will noticeably change our frequency. That in itself, together with metaverse, will lower our vibrations and we will become more solid. At that point, they can probably more lower Schumann's resonances significantly, even those controlled from Saturn. And there are already many who say and claim to say that the Schumann resonances is not what it used to be. Thoth hinted in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, allegedly about 36,000 till 38,000 years old, that the Council of Nine dwells below in the underworld. Also think Nergal and Ereshkigal from the West Penry Papers. They dwell in the underworld. Thoth said there is a tunnel leading from the Sphinx in Egypt directly to where some so-called gods have their residence. And Marduk has his own chamber there, or at least he had 36 to 38,000 years ago. Curiously, there are archaeologists today suggesting there is a tunnel system below the Sphinx. But the Egyptian chief archaeologist Sahi Hawass refuses to let foreign archaeologists explore that area. So we need to ask questions about this person. For whom is he really working? And why are archaeologists not allowed to enter that space? Enki's and Marduk's father-son issues explained. As discussed earlier in this book, the Orion Book, Volume 2, Marduk is not Enki's cosmic son, only the physical son from being born as Horus. Since the lifetime of Horus, Marduk has allegedly incarnated here on Earth lifetime after lifetime, just like we humans do. But with this difference, our remembrance is being wiped cleaned, so we get amnesia, and Marduk doesn't get that. Of course not. The major difference, however, is that Marduk reincarnated over and over into Enki's pure bloodline and did so up until the day he created his own bloodlines with Isis and Ereshkigal. These days, I would suggest he incarnates in the Marduk-Isis bloodline. Thus, he followed Enki from the second construct into the third construct, and we are living in the third construct, which is the matrix. Zechariah Sitchin, the late translator of the Sumerian tablets, wrote that the so-called gods left the planet after an internal war between Marduk and Inanna, between brackets Isis on one side and many other gods, including Enki himself on the opposed side. This supposedly happened some 4,000 plus years ago, which is time-wise approximately halfway through the matrix construct. Maybe this was the approximate time frame in which Enki was castrated and thrown into the Abzu. The rest of the so-called gods, who includes Syrians, the Khan kings, were also stripped of their creative abilities and descended to a lower region of the astral. Left on the planet were Marduk, Isis, and Ereshkigal, all three in human bodies of pure bloodlines. They were not part of the Orion punishment that was implemented on the other gods because these three were in human bodies. The rest of the gods apparently possessed and took over already occupied human bodies and hosted them, while the original souls in those bodies were temporarily overpowered and no longer in control over the body. I would argue they used Enki's pure bloodline to do so. More about that kind of possession later in this book. In New Age circles, this phenomenon is also called a walk-in. So now you know what this means. When you are hearing this term or have heard about this term. Marduk now became Satan. So who is the Satan in the Bible? That is most of the time Marduk, the so-called Lord of this world. And this fit him like hand in glove. Although Isis fled from him, so he no longer could continue that bloodline. Ereshkigal was happy to take over the task. Marduk now probably felt he was the one controlling Earth. This was not entirely correct, however, because Enki can still communicate with his team of loyal elites here on Earth, the top echelon of this world, um, from his position in the lower astral realm. Still, Marduk was and is here at ground zero, able to manipulate things firsthand. I am sure Enki was quite unhappy with his situation and his limitations, and he didn't like that Marduk had free range on Earth. He and his, between quotation marks, son are not exactly close buddies. Still, they are both working on the same goal to leave the Matrix and taking out Orion universe. Their ideas of how it is going to be done differ in details. Both want to be in charge. Marduk, of half Syrian bloodline, has a lot of the Syrian competitive genes, where only the strongest deserves to survive. His view on his, between quotation marks, father is quite ambivalent because he both needs him and wants to get rid of him at all. Therefore, Marduk must learn from his father's technological advancements here on Earth manifested in all this, between quotation marks, innovative nanotechnology we see developing in jaw-dropping speed right now. This is Orion technology extremely misused and abused by Enki and transferred to us humans to implement, to create the singularity. The term for this is Technological Transfer Program, TTP. So Marduk needs his own scientists to learn from the technology Enki floods the earth with. In juxtaposition, Marduk wants to get rid of Enki because so long as Enki is alive, he is a threat to Marduk's chance of being the king of Orion, dash the emperor of the universe. They both want that position. And we, as human soul group, are their cannon fodder and are their foot soldiers and are their doormat. Yeah, we are being abused and misused and used for their plans. So let this sink in deeply. So they both want that position, and there can only be one Khan Us, Khan Ur, which means king of the Ka or the king of kings. And now we get the deeper understanding of this sentence, king of kings, mentioned in the Bible. Therefore, Enki must get rid of Marduk as well in one way or another. This is the father-son issue they have. And as last of this chapter 8, and then I have finished reading 2 chapters today, a previous race between Enki and Marduk. Barbara Marciniak's Pleiadians tell us we humans, in a previous singularity, attacked Enki's remote stronghold in the Pleiades as cyborgs. According to them, there are still many human cyborgs there, ruling at least one of these star systems with an iron fist. The Pleiadians, channeling through Marciniak, say they are renegades from that nightmare, and they want us to help them change the timeline so the invasion never happened. The Pleiadians report to Enki, who grades them in their interaction with us humans. They say he is a, between quotation marks, tough teacher. It is my current conclusion from that the invasion of the Pleiades by us humans in a cyborg form was not happening because we figured out who Enki is while we were in a previous metaverse. Instead, I believe we were manipulated by Marduk to invade because Marduk wanted to shatter Enki's stronghold, and he used us to do it. If this is true, I would further suggest that the previous singularity dash metaverse was led by Marduk and not by Enki. Moreover, it is plausible that we were not in metaverse at all back then. Instead, we were in gray, cyborg bodies, still in the matrix. Through stargates and hubs, maybe in hollowed out crafts. Controlled by Marduk, we invaded the Pleiades. And so, with this said, I have come to the end of this today's uh, live book reading from the Orion book, Volume 2, written by Wes Penry. And I would highly suggest you to buy these two books yourself. Start reading it because it's loaded with interesting information. Visit the links mentioned in the text box beneath the video. And for now, I want to say, ponder upon all the information that you have heard today. And I am very thankful that many of you were listening along and have tuned into the channels on Facebook, Rumble, and YouTube. Thank you so much for this. Um, I wish you all a beautiful, joyful day and a nice weekend, and also filled with a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge and revelations coming to you. And as last, let us listen to a short piece of music created by Ben Sound called Hope. See you next time and wish you all a beautiful weekend. See you later.